All right, let me finish up with this cow and the bacteria. So, as I mentioned in that previous section, some of the bacteria will vary in their susceptibility to antibiotics, and often this is caused by mutations that would occur. So once the environment changes due to the antibiotics being introduced, some of the bacteria will die, maybe most of them, but those that would have an antibiotic resistance will survive, which means they'll get to adulthood, they'll reproduce, and for bacteria it's not really adulthood, but they'll be able to reproduce. So there'll be more of the ones that are having the antibiotic resistance. So now you have a problem with antibiotic resistance in your cattle, and the farmer has to respond by using more antibiotics. And all that's doing is pushing the evolution of antibiotic resistance in these bacteria. So it's kind of a ugly circle in the sense that because of antibiotic overuse or inappropriate use, we're having antibiotic resistant bacteria pop up in agriculture, in hospitals, that sort of thing. So human misuse of antibiotics is speeding up the natural selection process or evolution of these bacteria. So the surviving bacteria pass on their trait to the offspring of antibiotic resistance. And over many generations, we get the appearance, the development, the evolution of antibiotic-resistant bacteria that now may become a major problem in this particular example, a particular farm, for example. So in the human food supply, what happens is infections are not easily treatable by standard drugs. New types of drugs have to be generated, or a combination of drugs have to be applied. So basically, we're pushing and developing stronger, more antibiotic-resistant bacteria in our food supply, in our food chain. Okay, other types of selection, artificial selection. So humans have been pushing the evolution of agricultural plants for literally thousands of years through selective breeding. So since it's humans choosing the desirable traits that they want to plant or breed in terms of animals, this is referred to as artificial selection, as opposed to natural selection that would occur in the wild without human interference. So artificial selection, it's the purposeful breeding of plants and or animals by humans. And again, we've been doing that for thousands of years. So we've customized agricultural plants through many, many generations through selective breeding, artificial selection, by selecting different parts of the plants that we want to emphasize. So here's the ancestral species of corn that led to modern corn today, and it's something called teosinte, which originated in central southern Mexico, and through customized breeding, specialized crop breeding, artificial selection, humans have selected the characteristics, the traits that they like and have favored over time. And that is nice large ear of corn with nice large kernels of corn, which are technically seeds. This is much larger, much more nutritious today than the original teosinte plant that still occurs in the wild. Over here on the right is an example of one variety of modern banana that is the result of artificial selection, customized breeding. And what you see on the right here is one of their wild relatives that humans first selected and bred to get the plants that we have today. So in bananas, those dark, tiny little specks in the center are small seeds. In the wild, the wild variety has much larger seeds, so this is going to be harder to eat with less soft fruit compared to, our store-bought bananas, the product of artificial selection. Many examples in agriculture. So all of these vegetables have a common ancestor, which is the wild mustard. And technically, they're also the same species, but through selective breeding, we have cabbage, Brussels sprouts, kohlrabi, kale, broccoli, cauliflower, and notice that it shows you what part of the plant has been selected for. From the buds, the cabbage, from the flower clusters, cauliflower and broccoli, including the stems. In other words, selective breeding to emphasize that part of the plant, or the leaves of the plant, right? Or the stem of the plant. And again, the wild mustard, which grows on the side of roads all over the place, is the ancestral species. It's still around, but through natural selection, artificial selection by humans, we've come up with these different varieties. It's kind of like the different varieties of dogs that we have that are still the same species, but they look very different. Okay? Like a Chihuahua and a Great Dane and a Rottweiler and a whatever, right? Doberman, Pinscher, Schnauzer, little yap Chihuahuas, okay? All the same species, but they look very different because of human-imposed artificial selection. Okay, let's look at structure and function. Relationship of structure, what something looks like, compared to its function, what it does. So within biological systems, structure and function are interrelated closely, and it provides insight into the other aspect. So the structure of something gives us insight into its function, or the function of something gives us insight into its structure. Like the structure of the lungs has been greatly modified over time, evolutionary time, to allow the lungs to be really good gas exchange structures. So the lungs that function for gas exchange with the environment, oxygen gets breathed in and passes to the bloodstream. In the opposite direction, carbon dioxide is offloaded from the bloodstream into the tiny little air sacs, alveoli in the lungs, that you then exhale. Okay. So the structure of the lungs correlates with its function. The lungs look like they look, have the texture and feel that they have in the tiny little air sacs, alveoli, that provide a huge surface area for gas exchange. And again, the oxygen leaves the little air pockets into the blood supply, and the carbon dioxide goes in the other way. And this is a model of some of the blood vessels that are surrounding and developing all of these little alveoli. So lots of small branches in the respiratory tree, ending in millions of tiny little sacs for gas exchange. And actually, as I take another look, this is actually a model of the respiratory tree, not the blood supply, actually. So imagine your lungs if you filled them with wax, and the wax is occupying all the cavities. Notice that there's a big trunk here. That's the trachea, and it branches into the lungs. The bronchi and bronchioles and small little branches. At the end of all these little branches are the alveolar sacs for gas exchange. So the structure provides, this type of structure provides a huge surface area, SA for surface area, for gas exchange. Okay, flow of information, or information flow. So our life's functions proceed normally, hopefully properly. Information must be stored and transmitted and used. So in order for your cells to process food and your lungs to be able to work functional properly, in order for you to be able to reproduce and have babies and have your babies carry your genetic information, all of those things are controlled by our genetic information, DNA. And it's transferred to our offspring, or if we're the offspring, it's inherited from our parents. So this is showing your sexual reproduction, but this happens at the cellular level also. You have cells in your body that are constantly being lost, your skin cells, and they're constantly being replaced. So your cells reproduce as well. And their progeny, or their daughters, the daughter cells, we'll cover this stuff later, the daughter cells inherit genetic material from what we call the parental cells. Okay? So every cell in your body was formed when a previous cell underwent cell division and transferred genetic information into it in the form of deoxyribonucleic acid, DNA. our genetic material. So the very first cell that you started out as is a fertilized egg, a zygote, fusion of an egg or ovum from mom and sperm cell from dad. We inherited our genetic information from our parents, and as we undergo growth and cell division, all of our cells inherit the genetic information from what we call the parental cells. So that info generation goes from generation to generation, whether it's individual to individual, like mom, dad to daughter, or from cell to cell. That information is passed along through the genetic material that's encoded in this molecule called DNA. So the cells use DNA in functional units referred to as genes. And the genes are used to express the genetic information to form a gene product, which is almost always a protein. So the genetic information in the gene is just information, like if you're reading a recipe. Okay? All of the DNA is like the master cookbook with all the recipes in the world. And the gene is a recipe to make a specific gene product or a specific protein. So like you open up a big recipe book and you look at a recipe for pancakes, that would be the gene. It's information. You physically make the pancakes, and that's the gene product. In this example, a particular protein. Okay? So the units of inheritance that get passed along from parent to parent, we can refer to them as genes, even though the genes are on the DNA. And as we'll find out, the DNA is clumped together into packets called chromosomes. Okay? But just at this level, our DNA is our inherited genetic material that's passed on from generation to generation. The DNA has basic functional units that are called genes. Again, it's just a section of DNA. Right? All of the genetic information within an organism is called the organism's genome. And sometimes that term is applied to a population or a species even. We have the human genome, which is all the genetic information in humans on the planet. Okay, let's look at energy transformation, pathways that transform energy and matter. So this diagram is showing you an ecosystem, the environment, the air, the water, the rocks, dirt, grass, which is part of the living ecosystem, and the organisms like looks like a type of deer here, or goat that's eating the grass. Okay? So various cellular activities that work to keep the animal alive, cellular activities that are involved in, say, growth or movement, that's work, and that requires energy. Okay? How does the energy get into an organism? The organism has to consume the food that it converts into cellular energy from the chemical energy in food, if it's a consumer, like you and me or this goat. If it's a plant or a photosynthetic organism, it harnesses its energy from sunlight. And it's able to convert that solar light energy into the chemical energy of food that the plant consumes itself. So plants and photosynthetic organisms make their own food, usually from sunlight, and then they eat their own food. Okay? Consumers like us can't do that. We have to consume chemical energy in the form of food to convert it into cellular energy to drive our cellular needs. And the E here means energy. So energy enters into a system, an ecosystem. It's usually always sunlight. And depending on the organisms, whether they're producers or consumers, have to be able to utilize and transform that energy into forms that they can use, into food energy, which they generate themselves or they must consume. Okay? So life is made possible by the input of energy, like from the sun, and the transformation of energy from one form to another. So for a consumer, it's from the chemical energy in food into cellular energy. We'll talk about something called ATP later on. Okay? Plants and other photosynthetic organisms, the producers, they capture sunlight energy and convert it into their chemical molecular energy that they again consume themselves. They feed themselves, which is pretty amazing. Okay, we'll continue in the next section.